People in our own backyards are hurting. There are insecurities around food, economics, mental health, access to justice, healthcare, and our society continues to become more divisive. But there is hope. Right here in Chicagoland, there are people and organizations who are on the front lines, working to bring about positive and transformative change. Each week, we're going to meet some of these agents of change and examine how they are spurring innovative ideas and finding solutions to push our society forward in a more just direction. I'm Sufyan Sohel, and this is Change Agents. Good evening and welcome to Change Agents. Violence has a lasting effect on our young, their families, and their communities. In the United States, an average of 12 young people die by homicide every day. According to the CDC, homicide is a leading cause of death for young people ages 10 to 24. And among these victims, 86% were male and 86% were killed with a firearm. Among our high school youth, 22% report being in a physical fight, and over 16% reported carrying a weapon, and almost 8% reported carrying a weapon on school property. An estimated 50 to 60% of urban youth are exposed to neighborhood violence, and up to 1/3 of urban male youth report being the victim of violence, including being beaten or mugged, attacked with a knife or stabbed, or shot by another person. Among adolescents ages 15 to 17, African American youth living in high-burden communities like the south and west sides of Chicago are at the greatest risk for being exposed to community violence, more than any other population in the United States. Why is this violence happening? What can we as a community do to cut back on community violence? To answer some of these questions, I have with me Berto Aguayo, the founder and executive director of Increase the Peace, an organization that promotes peace through leadership development, community organizing, and advocating for solutions that tackle the root causes of violence facing our youth. Berto, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Our absolute pleasure. Berto, I just gave a bunch of statistics talking about what some would consider an epidemic facing our communities. Rise of violence, our young not only experiencing that violence, but sometimes maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, thinking that certain pathways are the only pathways available to them. Join a gang, buy a gun, et cetera, et cetera. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing about this problem?
Yeah, sure. I think statistically, and then I'll follow with an anecdotal story.
Please.
You look at some of the root causes of violence, and when we talk about violence as a public health issue, we really think about, you look at a map and you look at the highest levels of youth unemployment. You look at a map of the neighborhoods with the highest levels of lack of mental health clinics, underfunding of schools. Those are all the same neighborhoods that experience some of this violence that you alluded to during the introduction. And so at Increase the Peace, we deeply believe that in order to tackle violence, we got to tackle it at its root, and we have to make sure that we're providing opportunities to young people so that they can see other paths. Anecdotally, I know this to be true. I joined the gang when I was a teenager because I didn't see a lot of options in my neighborhood. And my mom was a single mother, working day in and day out to provide for me and my younger sisters, and I didn't know of any opportunities to do anything different. Luckily, when that opportunity did come into my life to work, whether it was at a grocery store, my first job, or when my principal connected me to Mikvah Challenge, an organization that connected me to work at an alderman's office, the doors opened up for me, and I was able to find a different way. And that life-changing opportunity happened at the perfect time in my life when I was 17 years old, and when I was looking for a way out, even though I didn't know it. And that's what we do at Increase the Peace. We provide life-changing opportunities for our young people to not only change themselves, but also change their community in the process. And that is kind of the magic of what we do. We give young people a job, not only to stay busy during the summer, but also for them to realize that they have power, that they have agency, and that, as we deeply believe, that they have the solutions to the violence that we're seeing because they're the closest ones to the problem.
Let's take a few steps back and talk about, one, your experiences in a gang, and two, why certain situations just can be cyclical, right? Like people may feel stuck or they feel held back. And talking about agency, why do youth feel they may not have agency? Can you share a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So I'll give you another anecdotal story. So Graduated my senior year of high school, and I was packing all my clothes and everything in black bags, putting them into my truck. And as I'm putting stuff into my truck, one of my friends who was in the gang comes up to me and says, "Hey, man, where you going?" And I say, "I'm going to college, man." And I'll never forget this. This is a guy who you see on the block, and you think he's just affiliated with bad things, but he says, when I tell him that I'm going to college, he says, "Man, bro, I would love to do something like that, but I'm stuck." And that was the day I left my neighborhood to go to college and move into my dorm room. And a lot of young people feel that way because, and this is something that I don't want to take credit for, this is Ta-Nehisi Coates in his book, Between the World and Me. He talks about how a lack of safety constricts our view of the world, and it makes our world so small that it's only a block, right? And our young people, there's such a lack of safety. I didn't feel safe even going across 47th Street, and I lived on 48th Street, right? And that makes your world that small.
Why didn't you feel safe?
Because there were other gangs, right? And you grow up with these artificial barriers, artificial boundaries of, we're from this block, we don't go into that block, right? And that limits your opportunities, that limits your world, that even influences how small you see the world. But then when somebody gives you an opportunity to go to the other side of the neighborhood, to go do a cleanup, to organize a peace march, to do things, not only does it expand that worldview, but it fills you with a sense of what's possible. And it gives you the tools to be able to manifest that every day.
Oh, I appreciate you sharing that. I did a project a couple of years ago with the city clerk who was bringing in high school students from around the community to City Hall to do like a model City Hall. And the most common thread there was that we have never been downtown. We've never been that. And from a kid who grew up in the suburbs, I'm like, oh, we'd come down to the museums once a year and check out the city and go up the Sears Tower, now the Willis Tower. But just realizing that there's people in our own city who feel so trapped, and I've never heard it that way, just trapped in their own block and in their neighborhood and never feeling even afraid to cross the street or cross those barriers. What are some of the other thoughts that are going on inside some of these youth heads? Like, why do they feel like they cannot, like you were able to quote unquote escape? Why do others feel that they may not? What are the barriers limiting them to?
Oh, well, I think just knowledge of the opportunities that are out there. Like what was different for me is that someone exposed me to an opportunity and believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. A lot of our young people are missing that connection. They're missing that connection to say, hey, you like this? There's an opportunity here that could be the connector between what you may be interested in and what you want to do in the future. And I mean, and just even back in 2017, UIC Great Cities Institute did a report on youth unemployment. In Back of the Yards, a neighborhood of 50,000 people, over 4,500 youth, 16 to 24, were unemployed and out of school.
16 to 24.
Yeah. So you think about that number, there's 4,500 youth in a neighborhood like that with not much to do, a lack of opportunities.
And none of them were in school?
Out of school, unemployed.
Okay.
And so you think about it, it's just a lack of opportunities, a lack of that support system to bring around those opportunities. And so what we have to do is just expand those opportunities, but also expand the ecosystem of supporting non-parent adults, because our parents need support, right, from other non-parent adults, whether it's teachers, counselors, organizers, because it takes a village to raise a child. And so we need to not only expand the opportunities year-round, but we also need to make sure that youth have an ecosystem of support to lean on so that they're able to get access to those opportunities, so that they're able to be nurtured and raised in that way. And I think that's what was true in my case, a principal, a grocery store owner that believed in me, that gave me an opportunity, that connected me to the opportunity, that I think that we try to fill in that gap in our neighborhoods with Increase of Peace. And I think that's what's often missing.
Well, I'm so happy you got that opportunity. Tell me a little bit about that, and tell me about what led you to create Increase of Peace. Yeah,
so ultimately it was the fact that that opportunity changed my life, and I thought to myself when I graduated college, I gotta pay it forward. You know, God saved me so much that I felt it like a duty to replicate those opportunities in my neighborhood. And so Increase of Peace was started with that idea: how do we replicate these employment opportunities that could be transformational in a young person's lives? and Increase the Peace started in 2016, and since then we've provided thousands of job opportunities to hundreds of young people. One of them, Myra Martinez, she came in through our programs as a teenager and had a lot of energy as a youngster, and little by little we helped structure and channel that energy, and she's become an amazing community leader who not only has managed to lead our community, but has also managed to lead programs now. So now she's leading youth programs that she was once a part of. And continuing on that pipeline of leadership, not only has she led youth programs, but now she's passing on the baton to some of her youth leaders to lead their own youth programs. And so that's the cycle of what we do. We create opportunities, but we also make sure that we create that pipeline so that our young people can have a natural way to continue doing what they love. And if that's changing their community, then those are the kind of opportunities that we provide.
That's so awesome. And I love how you just promoted your colleague who will be joining us next in this episode, and just hearing how highly you're speaking of her shows a huge testament to the great work that you're doing. So thank you. What are some of the biggest barriers you're facing in your work? Are you facing challenges from the local communities? Are you facing challenges from potential employers? What are you experiencing?
Ultimately, I think some of the biggest challenges, our community has shown us a tremendous amount of support. Like, we would not have grown the way we have grown had it not been for the trust that our community has given us. Our community...
Was that always there, though?
That trust, and mind you, this is a little bit kind of how it started. My mom's a hairdresser.
Okay.
So my mom, she has everybody's trust. She is the person that people know in our community.
So it's her son.
And then it's her son.
Got it.
And then little by little, people know me in the community. Those relationships are there from the beginning. And because we've done good on that initial trust, and people have seen the results of what we do speak for themselves, whether we've helped change their kids' life, whether we've connected them to a resource or service, and that's always been there. And I think it speaks to kind of how community has the solutions, right? We often think about all these challenges that our communities have, but then we look at organizations like Increase the Peace or other organizations, and we see that those communities have the solutions.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge that we have is providing adequate investment to those kind of solutions, to scale up the work. Some of the things that people often don't think about is how much does it cost to have insurance for a building, right? That's a lot of money. Things that people often don't think about is how much it costs to get all of these young people to go downtown, right? And to provide transportation expenses and the wraparound support services, because it's one thing having a job, but if that young person doesn't have a bus card, if that young person has unstable housing, right? There's so many more wraparound services that are needed in addition to the job, right? And so those are some of the challenges that we're facing. But I can tell you that with the resources that we have, the fact that we've been able to make such a huge impact, I think speaks to the fact that this work is scalable and that the solutions are there. They just need to be identified, highlighted, and supported.
That's so wonderful. You're doing such great work. My last question is, you just told me you're 2L, finished your second year at Northwestern Law, very inspiring, and be a lawyer. What keeps you motivated to go and do all this great work? And I know you're going to probably be using your legal skills to serve your communities as well. What's this motivation factor that you have?
Honestly, I think it's just paying back the debt that I feel I have to God for saving me all those years and paying it forward. Like I said, someone believed in me, connected me to an opportunity, and that's why I'm here today. And I just hope to do that for someone else so that they can do that for someone else, and so that our community can slowly but surely rise up and overcome some of these challenges.
Thank you so much, Berto. You should be so proud of the incredible work that you and your organization are doing. I know I'm really inspired to go out and continue to make a difference. And just thank you so much for joining us today on Change Agents.
Thank you.
Of course. We'll be right back with our next guest.
It's still honest, it's still thoughtful, and it's still definitely Chicago.
3, 2, 1.
Join me, Darius Hillman, for a brand new spring season of In the Arena, where we're bringing you compelling conversations with some of the most fascinating people our city has to offer, right here on CAN TV 19, on cantv.org, and the new CAN TV Plus app.
Welcome back. We've already heard about my next guest. I'm so excited to welcome Myra Martinez, a youth organizer with Increase the Peace. Myra, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Of course, the pleasure is all ours. Berto was just here raving about you, talking through your timeline with Increase the Peace. I would love to hear your own words about what brought you to Increase the Peace and what you're doing with them now.
Yeah, well, first I want to acknowledge Berto's statement. He is wonderful. He walks in the room and you know he's there because he's just so vibrant and loving. You can tell how passionate he is about the community.
I could tell that this evening, yeah.
And that is exactly how I got to Increase the Peace. It's a funny story. I know he mentioned I do have a lot of energy, and a bit of my background is that my mom, she is an immigrant, and my dad, he was huge alcoholic, and that kind of paved my upbringing. I became very angry. I became very, emotionally unstable because that was what was reflected in my home growing up. And entering high school, my mom decided that she would not tolerate that abusive relationship anymore. And she moved into this $400 attic in back of the yards. And it was the first time that she had access to a cell phone, access to her community, access to getting her first job. And that kind of led to me being on my own a lot growing up in that small attic. So not only that, I was also transitioning into my young adult life, teenage life. And that, was very hard because I came from this home that was always yelling and screaming and unstableness to this attic that was very silent and very just still. And it became a shift. So after school, I found myself not doing anything and even recognizing the streets in my own neighborhood because I was so isolated from it because of my dad's possessiveness. And I went to this thing called a camp out in back of the yards, and these campouts were from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m., 12 hours.
Wow.
And I was so intrigued by it. So I ended up going, and I walked to an organization called the Port Ministries. And there was dancing, there was music, there was just free resources, but there was also Berto. There was also Luz Maria Cortez, who was the after-school maths instructor at that time. And there was other people who have been role models in my life. And that day I decided how do I get involved in this? And I I met the organizers of Increase the Peace then, and I applied for an after-school matters position through Increase the Peace. And that was when my world began and expanded so much because my little attic became
so much bigger.
So much bigger.
I love how you said that that's when your world began. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that? And how did your life transform at that moment?
That's a great question. My world began because my world was only abuse and neglect and unstableness. And for the first time, not only was I learning about my own neighborhood and that my challenges weren't only my own, but other people were facing these things too, that gangs existed, that not everybody had money, not everybody had food, right? Because I grew up on food stamps, and I also grew up on food pantries, and I grew up on different thrift stores, right? I didn't have the resources I wish I did. And I realized that other people were facing that too. But my world really began because through Increase of Peace, I knew, okay, I can do something about this. And remember that energy I was talking about, that anger?
I can tell it now, yeah.
Yeah, I was very passionate. And thankfully, through Increase of Peace, it was the first time in my life that I had healthy and stable adult relationships in my life. Through my instructors, through Berto, through all of these people who really cared about the community. And although they had their own things going on, they always showed up for me, and they always gave me opportunities to channel that energy in the most healthy and productive way. So it's an honor to be able to do that through Increase the Peace still as their youth organizer.
So tell me about your role with now Increase the Peace. What are you doing?
Yes, so I organize youth programs. I am now like a mini Berto. I am now organizing youth programs in different variety of neighborhoods. But not only that, I'm empowering young people, and I am giving them the opportunity to find solutions to solve the problems in their neighborhoods. And I'm not a savior at all, and I'll never be that, but I can give them the tools and the resources they need to build a future for themselves.
That sounds great. And I like that you said, one, that you're mini Berto, but because you're also a Myra, right? And you have your own skills and talents, which I can see right now. Your energy is great, and you should be so proud of it. And but what really resonated is that you said, I'm not a savior. And I think oftentimes what we hear about in our cities, people coming in, swooping in with their capes, thinking that they can solve the problems that way. But as we've learned time and time again, that's not the way to fix the problems. It's by empowering the communities that we're working with.
Yes.
So I believe you're now handing off your program, empowering someone else to lead. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, our very own Daniela Sigala, which is an amazing, amazing young person. She is wonderful. And the same passion that I have, she has. So why not channel that energy even more? And the truth is, like I said, I'm not a savior, so I cannot attend to all of the people in the world or even in my neighborhood. But what I can do is pass on the torch and, continue to mentor and give guidance to those people who do find passion and genuinely wanting to see our communities do better.
What keeps you wanting to do this work?
I think seeing little glimmers of progress in our young people. So for example, I worked with this young person and he was gang affiliated. And all he knew was the block. All he knew was the block. And we would try to get him into programming. He wouldn't show up at all. But then he started telling the other people, well, you know what? We got to show up for work. We got to be here on time. Come on, y'all. And that is what makes me continue to do this work, is because there's little glimpses of hope. I know that there's a lot of bad things going on in the world, but it's those little things that we have to keep, looking for. But also seeing young people take ownership of their program. I always tell young people, I am the instructor of this program, but you dictate what this space looks like. And whatever you need is whatever I will base this curriculum off of. I'm the listener. You all are the ones who are the creatives here.
So when you're asking them this question, how do they usually respond of what do we need?
Sometimes they don't know how to respond.
Okay.
And that's okay. And I think that's where our job as Increase of Peace comes in. And sometimes when they just need to talk to us, that's all they need. But more importantly, I always ask these 3 questions. Do you want to be heard? Do you want to be seen? Or do you need advice? But I'm here at the capacity that you're here in, because we cannot force relationships. We have to build them. So when we ask them that, sometimes they don't know, and that's okay. And I think giving them the space to feel what they feel and know that they're not saviors either is important.
I appreciate you saying that, because from what I'm hearing is you're not telling them how to fix their problems. You're asking them what they need from you at any given moment. Do they need just someone to be there? Do they need someone to listen to when they're just sharing with? You're creating a safe space for them, and I think that's what's really important.
Yes, and earlier when I was saying that, when I entered Increase of Peace, it was the first time I had stable, healthy adult relationships in my life. All these young people that we're working with, sometimes I'm the first healthy, stable relationship they have in their lives. It's very important, and that's why this work is so delicate and so precious to me, because it's so impactful. Think about how many people you interact with each day. And if, I can be that one good interaction with this young person, no matter what unstableness they go to at home, they know that they'll be safe through our programs.
And with you, and I can't tell you how inspired I am by your work and Berto's work, and I really hope that you're able to continue to grow all the amazing programming that you're doing and keep instilling this hope and sense of community in the young people you're working with. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. We'll be right back with this week's Change in Action.
I'm Govalta, host of the podcast 3 Questions With, a public affairs program elevating the voices and visibility of matters most important to the Hispanic Latino community by speaking with community and industry thought leaders on the social determinants of health and democracy. Join us Wednesdays at 7:30 in the evening via Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org and the CanTV Plus app.
This week in Change in Action, we are pleased to introduce you to Pilsen Neighbors Community Council, an organization serving as the voice of the Pilsen community.
The Pilsen Neighbor Community Council has been an organization serving the Pilsen community for almost 70 years. I'm proud to be part of the transition from Pilsen Neighbors Community Council into the Leadership Development Institute, where this Pilsen organization is going to have a larger building to house all of the same mission and important social justice issues that they've been tackling before, but with a wider reach throughout Chicagoland, addressing education, parent leaders, and even providing immigration and criminal law services. Over the past year, the Pilsen Neighbors Community Council has been in the front lines addressing the needs of migrants who've arrived recently to Chicago. Pilsen Neighbor Community Council stepped up to the plate where even our local government institutions were unable to provide support, and organized the community in Pilsen to be able to provide shelter and food, health needs, and it's inspiring to see what everyone in the community can do. We hope that more attorneys like myself can volunteer their time to support us, especially now that we're experiencing a higher need here in Chicago for those who can provide immigration services.
Thank you to the Pilsen Neighbors Community Council for empowering individuals to enact positive change for themselves, their families, and their communities. Thank you also to Berto, Myra, and to Increase the Peace. You gave us a lot of food for thought this evening, and I'm so grateful that Chicago has leaders like you who are working hard to empower our youth and to combat violence. As we learned tonight, there are many factors that lead to community violence, including poor family functioning, parental substance abuse or history of criminal involvement in gangs and social rejection by peers, and lack of safe housing and community environments. Each of these factors must be addressed in different ways using combinations of prevention, intervention, and response. The earlier we can prevent violence, including by building up young people's families and communities, the more effective we will all be. But this is not an issue that we leave to law enforcement or those elected to office, but a responsibility that we must each be a part of. President Obama said, "We cannot stop every act of senseless violence. We cannot know every evil that lurks in troubled minds. But if we can prevent even one tragedy like this, save even one life, spare other families what these families are going through, surely we got an obligation to try." My friends, let us each ask ourselves, what are we willing to do to try to save one life, to save one child, the future of our communities? Only by working together can we find effective solutions. Like Berto and Myra, we each have the power to be change agents. Let us all be change agents. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.